So welcome to this very first Apprentices webinar. I'm Neil Wilkins, and I think you all know me by now. And welcome to this particular subject, which is customer personas. And I think we're going to find that this is going to be something we're going to be talking a lot about as we go through this program. And the reason is there is nothing probably more important than your customer. This is a particular presentation which is really very, very close to my heart, because for me it's something that crops up every single day when I'm doing my marketing, when I'm working with clients, when I'm working with you guys. It is a really, really critical thing to get your head around. Now, the interesting part is the word persona. And as we go through the presentation, what you'll see is that the word persona is something that is absolutely critical to the work that you will be doing. And it's a very, very different kind of approach really to marketing than just purely thinking of customers as customers. When we just think of customers as customers, in essence, really what we're doing is we are just really kind of viewing them as kind of a generic thing that doesn't really add a huge amount of value to our marketing. But once we start thinking of them as personas, and the clue is actually in the word itself, persona, so really thinking them as people, as personalities, as people and entities and humans that we really need to get to know, then what we do is we really start to escalate the power of our marketing. And I'll be explaining why as we go through this session. So I'm hoping you can all see the slides on the screen here, and you probably, hopefully, like I can see some people on the call on the right-hand side. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but hopefully you can see the slides as we talk through them. Now, the definition really of personas is very, very far and wide, and I'm not going to spend sort of too much time going into the kind of technicalities of what a customer persona is. But actually what we'll do is we'll kind of be able to find that we can take a personal approach to our customers when we start to really think of them as personalities. Now, the key really here is to think about them and almost become kind of obsessed by them. And I'll explain why that's really important as we go through this presentation. Now, the idea really is what we're trying to do is to spot these individuals so that we can literally pick them out in a crowd. And when I'm sort of working with clients, what I typically do is I kind of go through a bit of a day in the life of, if you like, with the definition of the customer that would be ideal to market to, so that when you actually get into that level of detail, kind of thinking about who's really important to be marketing to, we can get super focused on actually developing products and services and communications and branding and messages and campaigns that just focus on them. So the pertinence of this particular slide is that it is very much about kind of cutting through the noise of all the people you could be marketing to and be focusing on the people that you should be marketing to, because they're the ones who are going to resonate most with your products and services, and they'll be the ones who are going to give you the very best return, because they're going to be loyal, they're going to buy more products and services than your average kind of customer. And so these are the ones that you can get really passionate about. So the trick when we start this whole process is to kind of, almost in your mind's eye, start to think about, if I could only market my products, my services, and my brand to one customer over the next 12 months, who would they be? What would they look like? What would they sound like? How would they dress? And if I was to actually spot them in a crowd, much like this slide, would I be able to really identify with them? Would I be able to actually find them in a crowd? And I often use the sort of analogy of, if your ideal customer persona was to walk in the door now, would you recognize them? Could you kind of really identify with them and spot them differently to everybody else that you could possibly market to? So this is all about targeting. So there are three things that we need to do when we think about customer personas. And I'm going to start to use the word persona a lot more now rather than just customer, because this is something then that really kind of elevates our kind of quality of marketing. So with our persona then, what we need to do is we need to define them. So we need to kind of figure out who they are. We need to find them. So, where do they reside, either digitally or in the real world? And then we need to listen to them. So we need to find out what they want. We need to kind of figure out how we can then resonate with their needs, their challenges, and help them to solve their problems and the issues that they've got. Because if we can do that, then we stand a chance of developing an intimate kind of relationship with them. So, what do they look like and how do you find one? So the ideal scenario is that you create some kind of emotional reaction in the persona that you're targeting. Okay, so it's very easy to have a website or to be doing social media or to set up an ad campaign and make lots of noise and just hope that, you know, an average kind of person comes along and says, hey, I'm interested. The harsh reality is, though, that these people will not be interested. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out who are the kinds of people or personas who are going to most resonate with what we have to offer. And if we can identify who they are, then our task as a marketer is to create some kind of emotional reaction in them. So it's quite easy for them to logically see the link between themselves and their needs and your product and service. But the trick in really, really optimizing the power of personas is to figure out, can you also, at the same time as appealing to them logically, can you also get some kind of emotional reaction from them? And this is your task as a marketer. This is kind of what your aim is. So here is a persona, or here are two personas, and we'll call them Mr. and Mrs. Parker, for example. And this is a particular persona or set of personas. It's a partnership. And this is, again, something that becomes quite interesting when you think about personas. And this is one that I actually use in a real-life scenario with one of my clients. And Mr. and Mrs. Parker, as you can see, are not your average kind of person. And this is the whole point of personas. So what it is, it's about really identifying with them. And as you look at them, you can see what they're wearing, you can see how old they are, you can see what they're doing, you can see a kind of a certain style there, you can probably intuitively pick up a certain dynamic between the two of them. And these are all important criteria when you're defining customer personas. I mean, if you just were to say, oh, well, my customer demographic, for example, and this is often how, you know, more traditional marketers look at it, you know, my demographic is that they're, I don't know, between, say, 60 and 70, and they live in Surrey, for example. Well, what does that do? What does that tell you? It tells you very, very little. Whereas if you look at Mr. and Mrs. Parker, you can see that they probably like the outdoors. They look quite kind of healthy for their age, so they're probably quite active individuals. You can see what they're wearing, so they're kind of dressed for walking, probably a more of an amble rather than a full-on hike up a mountain right now. But again, you start to kind of pick up an essence of who these people are. Now, if you look at them and you kind of think about them and you think maybe about the dynamic between them, if you had a product or service that potentially can resonate with them, you can then start to think about, well, okay, if it is a couple who are making a decision around this product or service, maybe to purchase it, maybe to engage with it, who is the more dominant personality, if you like, within this relationship? Because one of them could be a decision maker in this process, and the other one could be an influencer. Now, most people as marketers go after the decision maker. If you work in business to business, you generally are targeting the budget holder, the person who's going to part with the money for your product or service. That's actually quite a simplistic way of looking at it, because often the best people or the best personas to go after are actually the influencers, because they're going to influence that decision that the budget holder or the decision maker is going to be making. So I often start with the whole persona exercise, trying to encourage people to think about, well, okay, you might have this target person in mind, but then so probably do all your competitors. They're all probably targeting the decision maker, the budget holder, the more obvious persona that you'd be targeting, and they're probably doing the same. So what I often start with my clients is by saying, yeah, but who are the actual influencers? Because just by definition of the word, they can influence that decision. And if you can start to appeal to them, they're going to be advocates of yours. They're going to start selling the messages that you want to convey on your behalf. And if it comes from them rather than coming from you, it probably has a lot more tangibility, probably has a lot more depth and a lot more influence. So as you can see, it's a lot of this is actually about relationships and understanding the dynamics of how these people interact. Now, another thing that you can start thinking about is, okay, well, if I've got a product or a service that I'm trying to sell to Mr. and Mrs. Parker, are there other things around Mr. and Mrs. Parker's life that we could maybe, as an organization, start to identify with, start to share? Now, one really good example here with Mr. and Mrs. Parker is that they are typically National Trust members. So they like to spend, weekends, maybe during the day as well, actually going to National Trust properties, going on National Trust estates for walks and things like that. So what is that then that allows you to integrate some of your messages which are over and beyond your typical, I want to sell you, Mr. and Mrs. Parker, this product? If you can start to get into more of a dialogue that talks to their world, and this is the whole point about personas and why it's so important, you've got to try and integrate into their world rather than just think about what it is you're trying to sell or what it is you're trying to market. You've got to kind of view this whole thing from their perspective. And thinking about other things that they do, they probably travel a lot. So, where is it that they're traveling? You can make assumptions and then go and test these assumptions by watching how they react to the communications that you do. Another thing as well that becomes very clear when you start to think of these personas is kind of the channels of communication that you can get to them through. So, for example, could you imagine Mr. and Mrs. Parker using Snapchat avidly? Well, probably the answer is no. They're probably not avid Snapchatters. Having said that, you will definitely be finding them on Facebook because they're using Facebook to keep in touch with the family, to share family photos and the like. And there's a lot of research that says one of the fastest growing personas actually in Facebook is Mrs. Parker. So, a lot of these things can kind of then open up some real clear priorities and sort of opportunities for you in terms of filtering out the things that are going to be irrelevant to you. So channels is one, how you're going to get to this target persona, the type of content that you share, content around, the things that will resonate with them. Rather than it being all about you, it's all about how can you translate what you want to say in a language and a style and a tone of voice through channels that they are interested in or that they're already resident in. And here's another one. This one's called Ben. He's actually one of my customer personas. I target Ben quite a lot with some of the products and services that I offer as a marketing consultant. And if you look at Ben and then think of Mr. and Mrs. Parker, would you imagine Ben resonating to the same messages that Mr. and Mrs. Parker would? Well, clearly not. He has a very different lifestyle. He's at a very different life stage. He probably has very different priorities. He probably spends his weekends doing very, very different things than Mr. and Mrs. Parker. The kinds of content, the kind of tone of voice that would resonate with him, again, very, very different. Now, you might say, well, this is blindingly obvious. This is so, so obvious. But you would be amazed at how many marketers know this stuff, and yet they then, when they're doing their marketing, just think about themselves. They think about their product. What do I want to say about my product? The features and benefits. They think about, the kind of brand that they have, and they promote that, rather than actually going 180 degrees, thinking through the eyes and ears and feelings and thoughts of their persona. So the marketers in this world who are the most effective are the ones who are passionate about their target personas. Because in essence, what they do is they go through their customer persona and look backwards into their organization and kind of listen to what they say from that customer persona's perspective. And that is absolutely vital to being really relevant in the marketing that you do. And this one is a really kind of interesting example from a business-to-business perspective. And this was an example that actually I encountered. So this was a little tiny case study that I experienced when I was kind of learning this whole customer persona thing for myself. Now, Nahed, over on the left-hand side of the screen, she works in my Cairo office. And when I first met Nahed, who doesn't actually look like that, this is a stock image library photo of her to protect her anonymity. But basically, she was working and had started to work for me in the office in Cairo. And I thought, what we do in the UK, it's going to translate into Cairo. They'll kind of love our stuff. And, the initial kind of foray into the Middle East for me was quite fruitful, was quite positively received. And so I thought, well, everything that we do in the UK, we can just kind of send across to the Middle East and they'll get it. So at the time, I was using a persona called Juliana. And Juliana was a professional business person. She was, quite successful. She had, career development plans. She knew what she wanted. She was in a kind of a marketing manager, moving into marketing director kind of role. And I was kind of working with her as a persona. And I had quite a few clients looking like her, sounding like her. And so what I was using was kind of imagery and a tone of voice that relayed Juliana through all of the communications that I did. And in essence, really, she was kind of the face of the organization. So when I didn't want my beautiful face up on the screen, it was Juliana. So really, this was, again, a sort of a stock library image of a style of kind of business that we were conveying as a team. And I thought, well, she's very well presented. She's got a lovely smile. She'd be a good face for the organization. So if you come to my website, no matter where you are in the world, and you see somebody like Juliana, it's a welcoming face. Come in, experience the products and services, and let's talk. And I thought it was just going to be easy to do. So I was kind of falling into my own trap of this kind of one-size-fits-all approach. And more fool me. Because Nahid then turns around to me and says, do you know, Neil, you've got this completely wrong. We're going to need brand new materials for the Middle East. And there's me thinking, well, why? What's wrong with Juliana? She's welcoming. Look at her. Look at that smile, enigmatic. I was thinking it's got to apply to everybody. And Nahid said, it's not going to work. And there's two reasons why it's not going to work. And I said, well, I'm not really getting this. What is wrong with a professional businesswoman being on the homepage of the site? And he said, it's completely wrong. And this will turn off every single potential client in the Middle East. I said, okay, well, I'm listening then. And so Nahid basically told me two things that were wrong with this image. And this is why customer personas are so important. The first thing is that Juliana has her arms folded. And in Nahid's world, that means I do not want to do business with you. Now, I wouldn't have even seen that because I'm looking at Juliana's face and that welcoming smile and thinking, yeah, great, come on, let's talk. This looks like a professional, well-run business. Nahid doesn't even see that. Nahid sees the arms folded and thinks, okay, I don't want to do business with you. Okay, right. So we've turned everybody off to start with. But Nahid said, actually, it's even worse than that because there's something else in this image that is actually going to turn the Middle East off even more. I'm thinking, I'm not getting this. And I would not spot it. And he said, actually, the biggest problem with this image and the whole style that you're conveying is that Juliana has her sleeves rolled up. And that, in Nahid's culture, means that Juliana wants to have a fight with her. Oh, okay, right. So I've now massively got this wrong. So in essence, what I did was I assumed product and service from my perspective would resonate with my target audience. But Nahid very, very quickly and very carefully and very cleverly taught me that I need to take the perspective of my target personas who I want to attract. And it is people just like Nahid. So we created a whole new set of products, a whole new set of services, and we conveyed them, we communicated, we marketed them through different channels, appropriately for that target persona that we were looking for. And things have gone really, really nicely. And I haven't fallen back into that trap once again. But for me, it was a really clear sign as to how important it is to think about your target audience and do not assume that one way of delivering your marketing is going to suit everybody you want to attract. And in fact, it's probably very unlikely. And as an example here, Nahid, for example, in her business world, uses Facebook as the key social network, whereas Juliana is using LinkedIn. So, you're looking at very different channels, both professional businesswomen, both at the same stage in their career, and yet using very different means of communication, using very different channels, using very different styles and tones of voice. So I have the same product and service offering for both of them, but I have to reinvent that product and service offering because both of these two personas are very, very different in how they perceive what it is I'm offering. So it's my responsibility as a marketer to figure out how to do that. So different channels, different communications, same product and service, but a different way of actually marketing to them. So what I normally say is, well, don't worry about how many you might have to start with. Think about the one over the next 12 months who is going to be most important for you. And start to figure out, and we'll go through this in various materials another time. This is more an introduction to why it's important, but figure out almost a day in the life of, figure out, kind of what are they doing? When are they doing it? Can I really get what I like to term professional intimacy with this particular customer persona? Professional intimacy. In other words, I know what they're doing when they're doing it. It's not kind of in a stalker kind of way. It's not kind of sinister, but it's so that I can actually adapt the timing of when I communicate, the timing of my marketing and how I do it, and the tone of voice. So it's totally and utterly focused and appropriate to them. And they as a persona will pick that up. They as a persona will understand that this is really focused, almost to the level that they will feel it's kind of one-to-one, bespoke, customized, however you want to call it, but kind of one-to-one marketing. And that's the approach that we're after here. And only really in that way and doing it that way are you going to get this kind of level of professional intimacy that you need. So by focusing on a persona and really figuring out, if I could only target one persona in the next 12 months, who would that be? Then it allows you to prioritize the right place for your marketing, doing things at the right time, and doing it through the right tools, the right channels of communication. So you then become super, super focused on doing the right things. And just because your competitors or just because others in the organization are just doing things randomly and making lots and lots of noise does not mean they're getting the best return for their marketing. Because what you'll be doing is you'll be doing it really precisely and really focused. You won't be wasting time on the stuff that isn't resonating. So that's really, really important for this whole exercise. Now, I mentioned influencers being quite important. Sometimes it's more important to focus on the influencers of your target customer persona than it is actually on the persona themselves. Because, particularly if you're in a startup organization, for example, it might well be that you're going to get to a critical mass and a traction, if you like, for your marketing by going out through influencers. And I'll explain why that's really important. So it could be that the influencer in the early days of you doing your marketing is actually more important than the end user of your product or service. So you can kind of figure out whether influencers right now are going to be important for you, but at some point in this customer's journey, an influencer is going to come into play. Now, we saw Mr. and Mrs. Parker, and that's one form of influencer. So they're going to be influencing each other in their decisions. But there's other kinds of influencers as well. I mean, we see a lot of influencers on, say, Instagram and YouTube now. So all these kind of YouTubers, they are very, very high level, very, very influential influencers in certain target audiences. We also see the media. A lot of journalists can also be influencers because they can shape how your target persona thinks about things, how they perceive things, how they consume information about the kinds of sectors or products and services in which you operate. So influencers can also be very sector specific. So if you've got a trade association or an industry body that either regulates or kind of represents your particular industry, then that trade body could be an influencer. So who in that organization or that association is somebody worth attracting and somebody worth communicating with, because they can have a huge part to play that allows you to then kind of be marketing your products and services out at scale. Because often when you target and you just focus on your specific customer persona, what you often find is that it can be actually quite hard to get to these people, or that you find you only get to a few of them. Whereas going out through influencers, if you attract the right ones and give them the right kinds of tools and messages to be able to pass on the messages that you're trying to convey, then often they will allow you and help you to do it at scale. So they can be really, really helpful in what you do. Here's a little example of an influencer for the same client that I was talking about with Mr. and Mrs. Parker. So my client is an artist. and she was producing some work, and Mr. and Mrs. Parker was her target audience. So this is quite high level, sort of bespoke sort of artwork. And my client was very, very interested to know whether or not she might be able to kind of dovetail into an industry that is, obviously hugely busy. The art industry is a massively noisy industry with a lot of content being shared, both visually but also spoken. A lot of people doing podcasts, a lot of people on YouTube now, sort of using social media to portray their art and to share their art. And she was interested to know whether the whole kind of influencer thing could work for her. So we tracked down a service called Scrunch, and you can go and have a look at Scrunch if you're interested in this, because what Scrunch allows you to do is to go and research on a particular topic. So if there's a particular kind of subject that you'd like to find out who the influencers in that subject are, it will give you almost like a league table of influencers, not at the kind of Kardashians and KSI kind of influencer level, but very much a sector level from a business perspective. And so here we looked down this little list, and we found this guy, Suarez Art, who just happened to be in geographically in the same kind of area as my client, just happened to be focusing and targeting a very, very similar audience. So this was quite a sort of an affluent Mr. and Mrs. Parker. And you can see there from the league table on the fourth sort of row down there, you can see that through Twitter and Instagram, and particularly Twitter in this particular case, Suarez has 38,000 followers, so pretty decent following, but is actually rated good in terms of engagement. So you can then approach and see whether then Suarez would be interested in actually doing some kind of collaborative affiliate kind of work in social media, particularly using Twitter, where his engagement is clearly much higher than my clients alone. So this would be a way that you could start to research and start to figure out who are the most influential players in the sector, where these target personas actually reside and where they're already being influenced, and see whether you can either forge relationships with these influencers, see whether you can piggyback on their kinds of activities, or maybe do some sort of collaboration with them, some kind of partnership, maybe with a small P, so not a big heavyweight partnership, but are there opportunities here for being, a lot more social in your social media activity, for example, and certainly this was a nice little example of how you might be able to do that. So I'd recommend you go and have a little look at this particular platform, because it allows you to kind of explore this whole concept of influencers and how you can use influencers in this mix of trying to attract and trying to become quite relevant to the target personas that you're after. Another thing that you could look for is actually what are these target personas talking about. So if, for example, your target persona is using Twitter as a channel, you can see at quite a granular level of detail who is influencing them, who are they talking to, what kind of messages and what kind of things are they talking about. This is something called Mention Map. So that's mentionmap.com, and the map bit has two P's in it, so mention map with another p.com. And if you put your Twitter account into there and just press on search, it gives you this lovely kind of spider diagram that will kind of evolve in front of you in real time. And it will show you who that who that Twitter account is communicating with in real time. So it will also show you the hashtags that that particular Twitter account is using or is related to. Then, of course, what it does, it shows you these other accounts that are in conversation or have engaged with this particular account. You can click on them, they move to the middle, and then the little spider diagram evolves around them. So very quickly, you can move to the second, third, or even fourth tier of connections for a particular Twitter account. You can see the subjects that they're talking about, the hashtags that they're engaging with, and so you can kind of see the world socially that they're actually in. So it doesn't take much to then extend your thinking on to thinking, well, if I can do that for myself, I could put a competitor in there, Or if I could find a few friendly personas who I'm trying to target, I could also put them in there, see what kinds of subjects they're talking about, see who they're engaging with, and see if I can build this kind of this picture, if you like, of and a model of the sector in which I'm trying to target. So this is what's called becoming a social business, having your kind of finger on the pulse and listening quite intimately to the conversations that are going on, the subjects that are resonating with that particular persona. So you can do it for yourself, you can do it on behalf of a competitor, so you can put their Twitter name in there. But as I say, if you find a persona and you can find a few sort of friendlies, you could put their details in there as well, and you can see who they're connected with. So often when we use social media, and most of us do have social media in our mix of communication tools right now. So if we're using social media, this is a really great way to keep your finger on the pulse of who is saying what, about what, when are they saying it, and who is actually responding to them. So very, very quickly you can engage with a target audience that maybe you don't even know. But as far as influencers are concerned, this is really, really important, because if you can find the journalists in the sectors or the marketplaces that you want to get to, well, this is a way of actually finding out what they're talking about. So if you want to get engagement with those journalists, this would be a way of doing that. So lots of different tools, lots of different ways of thinking about it, but certainly at the start, what we're really trying to do here with this whole concept of personas is to understand who they are, try and figure out how and why and where and when they're different to an average kind of customer that you could approach, so that we can start to build that intimacy. Because ultimately what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create some awareness in their minds that, hey, we're here to provide a great value to you, we're here to solve your problem, we're here to give you great service, and hey, we've got a product that's going to give you a great outcome if you engage with us. So then that gives them a little bit of kind of faith and trust that we can then convert them from being just aware into somebody who's actually going to either pay money or behave differently or engage with us or sign up for the program or whatever it is that you want to do or want to get them to do. They will then be able to do that with confidence. And then, and of course, because we know them intimately now, we will be able to retain that relationship and sustain that opportunity to go back to them later. So this is just a little bit of a sort of a teaser, if you like, for the next step in this journey. After you've figured out who your persona is and you've scoped them and you've created them, these are the 3 steps of what we call the customer journey. So these are the 3 main steps of the customer journey that we will, in the future, be taking this persona through. So that's awareness, conversion, and retention, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that another time. So this is the end of the presentation, which hopefully kind of gives you a little bit of a flavour for sort of what personas are and why they are so, so important, and also how, and really importantly, how you can use influencers to basically sort of position your products and services really, really appropriately at the heart of their world. And that's going to be a really, really important thing to do. So I'm going to now unmute everybody. So everybody is now unmuted. So everybody can say hello to everybody else.
Hi.
There you all are. Wonderful. And if you're just watching this as a recording, well, you can say hi in your virtual space wherever you happen to be watching this and recording this. So thanks for listening to that. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour over kind of what a persona is and why it's so much more important than just purely thinking about a customer as a customer. So the persona takes it onto a whole new level. So does anybody have any observations or questions about personas?
Maybe from my perspective, being in kind of the recruitment side of things, the only thing I say is, how do you kind of even start in the process of identifying a persona if you're like working in so many different markets, and obviously there's candidates, there's clients, there's so many different kind of people. What would you say is the best way of kind of starting to think about what that persona might be? Because it could be potentially endless, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good question. And I think for me, that's the point of personas. The very challenge that you've just identified there is the whole point of doing personas. if you don't do personas, it's all about you, because what you're trying to do is you put out this kind of compromise message to all of the possible delegates or candidates rather that you've got, and you put out this compromise kind of generic message to all of the possible recruiters or employers that you've got. And then nobody really kind of picks up on that wholeheartedly, because they think, oh, well, it's all about you. And unless something really resonates with what you say, you're unlikely to really get a close relationship with them. So basically how you start the process is you think, or you ask yourself the question, if I could only, and this is just the start of the thing, because you can repeat this for every persona you want to create, but you start the process by saying, if I could only communicate with one person over the next 12 months, who would that be? Okay, so you're really tough on yourself. You kind of move away from that thing that, well, I could communicate with, 100 different types of people, and you actually really are quite strict on yourself, and you say, okay, I can only communicate with one type of person. So that could be, I only want to go after, if you just think about your candidates for a start. So say they were lawyers, okay? So you're doing kind of, I don't know, junior lawyers, associate lawyers. So if you said, okay, well, the most important priority persona for this next 12 months is we have to get through the door more high quality associate lawyers as candidates, okay? So then we would then build this kind of persona, this picture of who they are, where they are, what do they do, what are their interests, what car do they drive, what do they wear, what things do they do at the weekend, where do they shop, where do they go on holiday, what was the last magazine they read, what was the last film they saw, what will they be doing on a Saturday afternoon, to build this real kind of picture of associate lawyers that we want to be attracting as candidates through the door, okay? Then what you can do, having got that, is you can then figure out, well, where are they? What kind of messages are really going to resonate with them? How are we going to get to them? When are we going to get to them? Because what we're allowing ourselves then to do is the luxury of actually, communicating at the right time of day and the right sort of day of the week, so we can get really, really specific. And then somebody within the organization then can almost take that persona on and say, well, I'm the sponsor of this persona. Okay, everybody else is probably going to want to communicate with them, but I can sponsor this persona to make sure that all of their interests are served with all the marketing that goes out. Then you come back and you say, okay, so who's then at the second best or the second most important persona? And you go through that very same exercise. Because generally as a business, most businesses, and I would say probably yours will be exactly the same. In fact, I would say probably all businesses, and yours is going to be exactly the same, follow the 80-20 rule. So 20% of your candidates and employers are going to bring 80% of the revenue to your business. So if you look at the numbers in your business, I will almost guarantee it follows the 80-20 rule. So if you can figure out who that top 20% of personas are, you'll be focusing your marketing on 80% of the revenue that you'll be creating anyway. So it allows you then to think, okay, well, now I'm going to prioritize those. What you're not doing is saying, okay, well, if you're an architect, for example, I don't know if you recruit architects, but if you're an architect, it doesn't mean that we're not interested in you as a candidate. But what we're saying is that the predominance of our marketing is focusing on the areas of the business where we know that we're going to get most value. And so if it was lawyers, and I'm being presumptuous here, but if it was lawyers, then you kind of be then focusing and prioritizing your marketing to those. So it's a tough old question, because you're saying that, there's loads of different sectors, there's loads of different opportunities, and there is, but the vast majority of your revenue is coming from just 20% of the people that you engage with. And that is the harsh reality of business. So if you can focus on those to start with, then you can repeat and repeat and repeat the exercise. And it becomes really, really focused and targeted. And, it is just getting started with that first one. And there's lots of different exercises we can do. And I've got some materials that I'm going to link through, and I'll put these on Slack, so that you can kind of read around this subject, almost like the step-by-step how you do this. At the moment, we're talking conceptually, but the step-by-step how you do it is also really important. So I'll link that in some little articles that you can read if you want to kind of do this in reality. But really good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So would there be an end point to the amount of personas that you could potentially kind of look at? Because if you're saying we take one and then maybe let someone else within the business become an advocate for that persona, what we're really talking about is having a different set of marketing materials, a different channels for each persona that you want to talk to. I work for a really big charity. We deal with a lot of different people. So both on the service side of things and then on the fundraising side of things. So I would say that there's going to be a huge amount of personas involved there. And then are we just racking up the costs more and more with trying to bespoke to too many different personas?
Brilliant question. Brilliant question. In terms of the cost of doing this. So cost, sort of financial cost, but also cost of resource and time and effort and kind of energy. I think that's a brilliant question. The answer is in the return that you're going to get. I think there's just so much sort of research and evidence that says the more you focus like this, the better return you'll get as an organization. So it feels at the start like, oh my God, this is just going to be absolutely huge. But that 80-20 rule, just genuinely, it really, really does work. When you start to kind of play with this, you'll figure out that actually, if you're looking at, say donors, because you're a charity, so people who are going to physically donate to you, I bet there's a profile of your most valuable donors. These could be ones who are possibly going to leave in their wills a legacy to your charity, for example, or it could be those who are the ones who do fundraising activities as a volunteer. So they're the kind of coordinators of little kind of local community events. Again, they could be another persona. So I think there's, yes, whilst there could be 1,000 different types of donors, as an example, there will be some who are just so much more valuable to you as a group, because of the way that they do it and because of the influence that they have. So I think probably, I was just thinking out loud there with the whole kind of the volunteer organizer kind of donor. I think if, as an example, because there's scalability there, they're a donor, but they're also an influencer. So I think if you've got somebody like that, I would say that, what you're not doing is, if you were just, for example, to say we're going to focus all our marketing on those people, what you wouldn't be doing is precluding anybody else from picking up the good messages. But what you'd be doing is being super relevant for the people who it really matters to. And I think that's what we're doing here. In a perfect world, you'd be doing one-to-one marketing to everybody. But of course, none of us can afford to do that unless you've only got like 2 or 3 clients. But so most of us have to do this persona activity to kind of group together like-minded individuals and say, well, look, you all behave and operate in that similar kind of way, and because you do, we're going to market to you separately and specially. And that's kind of the exercise we're doing here. So I think whilst, it's this kind of similar kind of question as to the first question, which was, because we can do all this stuff, doesn't that make it hard? Well, actually what it does, it actually makes it easier, because when you start to go through the exercise of kind of grouping all of these who answer to that kind of persona description, and once you start grouping them together, what you actually find is that quite a few of the people who really make a difference are actually in that persona definition. So actually you probably find there's not as many as you think. The organisation who I did, there was a wildlife trust that I did some work with quite a few years ago now, and they came up with 16 different personas of quite wide variety, from a member of the European Parliament through to a school teacher through to a mum. And it was, this was a huge range of different kinds of personalities. And what they did is, having scoped out all these different personas, they put them into a league table, and then they picked off the top 3 and said, well, okay, over the next year, we've probably only got the resources as a wildlife trust to, literally target just the top 3. But the difference that made, it didn't preclude all the other 13, but what it did is it meant that the relevance for those top 3, who are the ones that were really going to set their marketing alight, it just became so much more pertinent to them. So it's about prioritizing, and it's not about saying, hey, the rest of you aren't important. It's just about really valuing the ones who are super important to you.
And it maybe goes back to that bigger piece of work about the 80-20 then, finding out who your 20% are, and then doing your personas, like really targeting the personas within those that 20%, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly if you're, as you are, very, very well established organization, then I think you probably have that data and you can probably, sort of be asking around and you'll get that information. I mean, if you're in a much sort of newer organization or a startup or an organization maybe that doesn't have data and information, that you would have, is that maybe you start from the basis of, well, actually, who would I like as a customer? And particularly if you're in this kind of startup scenario, or you're looking to break into a brand new market, or heaven forbid, you've just been given these products and services and told to go away and market them without any kind of direction, then it's probably the question that I said right at the start, which is, okay, so who would be your ideal customer? And if you could replicate that ideal customer and just get thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and they all look and sound and behave the same, who would that be? So there's kind of two approaches there. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. There is one that says, okay, well, let's look logically at what we've already got and try and prioritize and support the business that way. And then there's the other side, which says, okay, but actually, who else would we want? And that's probably more on the growth side and the more on the kind of the future side. So yeah, another good question. It probably is. It's probably both. And I think what it is, it's probably about getting your head around the process of developing a persona and kind of how to do it. And then you can go and apply it in whatever way you feel fit, is reasonable and sensible for the business.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions, so really good. All three. Anyone else? Anyone else have any questions? I see a couple of people have got no sound or video on. So if you are just listening to this and watching, you can still use the little chat facility down on the bottom of the screen. You click on that and you can write down in there. So if you're only listening and you can't talk for whatever reason because you're sat in an office and you're just listening, then please use that. And also, if you're listening to the recording of this, because it looks like we are still recording, which is good, then feel free to, because we'll post this in Slack, feel free to ask any questions, obviously, on the forum there as well. So any other questions or observations or anything that you don't agree with? You don't have to agree with this stuff. So obviously you all agree. Brilliant. So as I say, the how-to is a slightly different thing. This is the why it should be important to you and the kind of, what are the opportunities. The how-to is I will share this with you sort of in Slack with a couple of little documents that I've got. They're not hugely lengthy reading, but it'll give you a bit more of a flavour as to kind of, if you wanted to go and do this stuff, where would you start? Because it's a really, really valuable exercise, and it doesn't matter what kind of organisation you are, large or small. I'm doing this with a few sort of solo entrepreneurs right now, and I've done it with huge, sort of multinational companies as well. And there's something of relevance here for absolutely everybody. I do it with myself. I do it, and have done. And I've got personas now that I've had for quite a few years, and yeah, I mean, I can spot them, out in the street. I can spot them in webinars. I can spot them, all over the place. And you do find that you change your tone of voice and you become a lot more relevant. Well, you hope you do, as a result of kind of coming from their perspective. And I think, if there's one thing to remember from this, it's all about the fact that, good marketing is not about you. Good marketing is all about being relevant to them. And it's all about the outcomes. And when we'll have a session on content strategy and how you kind of create really, really good content that resonates with the personas that you're targeting. And the big, big message there is that nobody cares about you. Nobody cares about your products, your services, what you're offering. All they care about, and you do this as well with other brands, so it's not a one-way traffic thing, but the only thing that your target customer persona cares about is the outcomes that they get from the relationship with you. In other words, how is their world different as a result of engaging with you? That's all they care about. And that's all you care about. When you buy a product or service, you're looking at that from a selfish perspective. We're human beings. This is how we operate. And so marketers who think that people are interested in what they've got to offer, they're kind of missing the point here, really. The point is nobody cares. And I can get from you what I can get from your competitor down the road. And that's the harsh reality. And it applies to me, it applies to everybody. So this is where good marketers always constantly think about their persona and actually how that persona helps them to shape how they communicate from that persona's perspective. And if you can turn everything around and look back in on what you do from that perspective, then you stand a pretty good chance, I think, of being a good marketer. But if you just look at it from, this is the products and services that we're trying to promote, you fell before you started because nobody's interested. It's harsh reality. That's the world that we live in. So it's not a prophet of gloom and doom. It's a harsh reality, and we just got to figure out a really neat way of kind of responding to that, and certainly getting some kind of professional intimacy with your target customer persona is, you know, the starting point for doing that. Okay, so we'll wrap things up here. Thank you very much for those of you who did attend. Thank you very, very much for those who sort of posted questions. This was quite fun. Quite enjoyed this one. And I will next time. I promise to those of you who can actually see the green boundary around my ears and around my shirt. If you look very, very closely, you'll see that there's strange stuff kind of going on here. I haven't quite got the green screen settings really nailed here. I've got lighting all around me and I've got all this amazing sort of technology and stuff, and yet I've still got bits of green around my face, which is very, very strange as I move. My hair's all gone funny as well, and wobbly. So I will sort that out before the next webinar that we do. But thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for contributing. We'll post this recording up into Slack. And as I say, if you've got any other sort of further questions sort of after this, and when you go away and sort of try and explore and play with the whole concept yourself, then do share experiences and stuff within Slack. And you know, I'm sure everybody will benefit from that as well. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you again on a webinar very, very soon.
Thanks, Neil.
Okay.
Bye.